Welcome to the live stream event. I want to welcome both citizens who are here in the audience at City Hall and also those of you who may be watching from home. Last November, Kyle voters approved a $294 million bond package focused on road and transportation initiatives. Tonight's road bond open house, of which this live stream is a part, is designed to update the community on what's been happening since the election, on schedule, design, and to provide a refresher on what roads will be improved and what new roads will be constructed. It's also an opportunity for citizens to ask questions of some of the key players who are planning and executing the road bond package. We have a great panel with us today. We have Kyle Mayor Travis Mitchell, City Manager Bryan Langley, and we also have Joe Cantalupo, who is with KFA Engineering, the firm hired by the city to design and construct the roads. Joe is the project manager. Mark McCliney with Samco Capital Markets, the city's independent financial advisor, we hope will be joining us as the panel progresses. My name is Jeff Barton. I'm with GAP Strategies. We're a statewide public engagement and planning firm headquartered right here in Kyle, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I have a short list of prepared questions that we'll ask just to get the panel kicked off, and then we hope those of you watching here in the audience or those watching from home will submit questions of your own. We look forward to getting to those. For those of you who are in person, we have slips of paper over at the edges. Some of you have filled those out already. During the meeting, if you want, just raise your hand, and one of our team will get you some more paper that you can submit questions right over here in the corner. If you're watching on live stream, and again, this is Wednesday at 5 o'clock, if you're watching on live stream, you can go to the City of Kyle's Facebook page, or you can go to kylebonds.com and ask your questions there. I also want to mention that if you're more comfortable speaking or asking your questions in Spanish, todo está bien, nosotros hablamos español. So we're glad to have your questions in English or Spanish as we move forward today. I again want to remind you, if you're watching from home, that this is Wednesday, June 28th, because we will be recording this so that folks who can't tune in live can see it later. That'll be up on the website. We also have boards and exhibits here in the back for people to come and view and talk to some of the engineers and experts on this project and get one-on-one attention. So if you're at home watching on live stream, once the panel's over, feel free to come on down to City Hall. We'll be here till 8 o'clock at City Hall with an open house and the opportunity to talk to some of these people on the panel in person. So with that, let's move on to the questions. Mark, glad to have you. We're just introducing folks. Mark is with the city's outside financial advisors, as I mentioned a moment ago. So let's start with you, Mayor. The city did a live stream event last fall on the bond package. You were part of it, and you were talking about what would happen if voters passed this bond, what the costs would be, what roads were included. It's not really visible to the eye, but I know there's been a lot happening behind the scenes. First of all, just remind folks what roads we're talking about.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Thank you all for being here, especially those who are paying attention online. You know, we try to do these town halls with the goal of getting information out to the residents. It's really important to us that as we're working on these roads, in particular, before you start to see construction take place, that you have a sense of the work that's being performed behind the scenes. So the roads that are being engineered right now as we speak, the majority of them are on the east side, and that is by design. So if you take the $294 million that the voters approved in November, and you try to determine the resource allocation between east of I-35 and west of I-35, roughly 70% of the dollars are being invested into our east side. And for those who live on the east side of our community, you know that that investment is sorely needed. It's a combination, the road bond package is a combination of new roads and reconstructing and widening existing roads. We think that that combination works in tandem to help create the best transportation network that we can possibly have. So if you look to the northeast, Windy Hill Road is the first major redevelopment project. We've done bits and pieces of Windy Hill through the years to help get us by, but this particular road bond project will make a dramatic impact on that road network. Moving a little further south, you have Beebe and Bunton. Both of those roads, Bunton and Beebe in particular, are very long roads. They were originally county roads. The city grew around these county roads, and they are nowhere near built out to the capacity for the traffic that is currently existing on those road networks, and in particular is expected to be traveling those roadways moving forward into the future. So those two road projects are in the bond. Additionally, there's a new road project called the Kyle Parkway Extension to Leiman. So 1626 is on the west. That's in between HEB and the Target. On the east side is the Kyle Parkway road network, and that is in between Seton Hospital and the Walmart and the Goodwill and the Lowe's, all in that area, which is a really great road, but it dead ends at Dacey Lane. So our road bond program has approved us to engineer and design an extension of the Kyle Parkway road network all the way around to Leiman High School, which will allow for additional transportation options for folks who live in that area to get to major shopping centers and to I-35. Now, on the west side, there's one road that's very near and dear to my heart because I've been pursuing trying to fund the reconstruction of this road since 2017. We've gotten there now, and that's Old Stagecoach Road. If you drive Old Stagecoach, it is like a, it's let's say it's not one of the new roller coasters. It's more like the Texas Giant. Have you ever ridden the Texas Giant? That's what it is, Old Stagecoach. And so increasingly there's traffic on that road. This road bond performs a complete reconstruction of that road, as well as Center Street, moving from Stagecoach all the way here to downtown Kyle. And so eventually the road network from Center Street all the way back to the back intersection at Stagecoach, and then all the way east to 150 Veterans Drive, which turns into 2770 where the Walgreens is. That road is being reconstructed. And then finally is probably our most ambitious project, and it is the one that's going to take the longest. It's called the Kohlers Underpass to Seton. So we're extending Kyle Parkway to Leiman, but we're also extending Kohlers Crossing underneath I-35 through several large development tracts across Beebe Road, which is another major reconstruction in the road bond that I mentioned a minute ago, over the Plum Creek watershed to Seton as well. That regional road is going to bring major commercial possibilities and connection possibilities between East Kyle and West Kyle, so that those folks who live on the east side will be able to have direct access to Costco and Tejas and those great restaurants and shopping centers that are here. And those who live on the west side are going to have access to the east, which is going to be future, very much Class A, mixed-use retail development centers. And so that's basically the road projects in a nutshell.
Great. Thanks very much, Mayor. And we'll be coming back to you with some more questions in a moment. I want to turn to Bryan Langley. Welcome. New city manager here for Kyle. You came from the Metroplex, which has seen its share of growth, so growth is nothing new to you. You heard the mayor talk about specific roads. How do we know, just to be blunt, that these are the roads that the city will go forward with and construct? What's to keep the city from going and doing different roads? And maybe that's a question for you and also for you, Mark, as the outside financial advisor.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the mayor's description of all the roads, and it's good to meet other members of the community. I've been here about 4 weeks now, but this is certainly not my first bond program that I've done. I've done many of these over the course of my career, and the bond language that's used for the street improvements and the bond brochure and all the materials that were provided to the public in the past, that's what really keeps the roads moving. Those are the ones that have been talked about, and that's what the funds are for. They cannot be used for other roads or for those specific projects. And so There's a lot of protections for the citizens and the contract with the voters to make sure that we proceed with those projects. And you can tell here at the back of the room with all the different materials that we have that these projects are all underway and in various stages of completion and design. So we're moving forward with them.
Thanks. And Joe, as a project manager, you just heard the mayor and the city manager mention that the city's obligated to do these roads. We've got boards here in the back. And you heard the mayor mention, too, that there's a lot going on, even though you don't see it all right now. Maybe it's not visible to the eye. And so help people understand why it takes a while to see bulldozers moving dirt.
Excuse me. Sure. Thanks, Jeff. The analogy that we use sometimes is that it's like building a house. You don't go to the lumber yard, buy a bunch of wood, and then start building a house. You have to select a location, you have to select a plan, you have to get permissions and permits, you have to find a contractor, and you have to go through the construction and inspection progress. And so while you see the finished product, the point is that there's lots of work that goes in ahead of time. And it's the same thing with building roads. Jeff made the point when he started the live stream that the bond was passed last November, and you don't see any construction yet. And that's because since that time, the team that I'm helping manage have been busy doing all those things to get ready for construction. Construction is actually the end result of lots of things. And that list of things includes finalizing the designs, right? And that includes the work that the engineering teams do, and that includes interactions with city staff, city council, and of course, the community. The design engineers right now are busy. They're in various stages of collecting field data, survey, locating utilities, getting right of entries for properties where they think they need to do some analysis. And that analysis might include environmental studies to see what environmental features are out there that might need to be avoided or mitigated. There's geotechnical work, which is really sampling the existing pavement for roads that will be improved to see what sort of pavement design is needed. There's lots of stuff that happens before roads get constructed, and construction is the end result of all those things. And so while you don't see roads being constructed, you should know that there's a lot going on to get to that point. There's a lot of activity that we're doing now.
Joe, you mentioned that there's a lot of activity going on. So give us a sense. It's still early, but how are things going? Are we on budget? Are we on time?
Jeff, you're right. We are early in the process, and we are so far within budget, and the schedule is progressing the way we've expected it to. We're expecting it to. But I think the most important thing to note is that the city has this team, right? The K. Friesen Associates team that is helping bring these projects to life. And part of what we do is we not only manage the individual projects, but we manage the schedule as a whole. And what we can expect is that the program as a whole will remain on schedule and within budget, but we might see variations from project to project. Some projects might have the opportunity to be accelerated, some might fall behind a week or two. The same thing with the funding. We may save money one place, but need a few dollars someplace else. Our job, though, is to get all those projects delivered as quickly as possible and to make sure the program gets delivered, as a whole when it's supposed to and within the budget that's been allocated by council.
Part of that budget really has to do with what tax implications will be and the commitments that the city made about how much an average homeowner might pay. So Mark, I want to get to you as the financial advisor. You worked very closely with city staff last fall to prepare estimates for the bond package on what the tax implications might be for an average homeowner. Again, as we've been talking, it's early. I know we don't have final numbers yet this summer on where valuations are, but give us an idea of what's happening in the region and here in Kyle. Were those estimates, do they seem like they were on target?
At this point, we look right on target. Our projections we were using for the next 2 or 3 years were 10% growth in taxable value. Historically, we were faster than that, but again, we want to, I think everybody on this panel and everybody working on this project want to deliver more than what we're promising. We want to do it quicker, we want to do it cheaper, we want to do it more advantageous to the city. Preliminary numbers is all that we've gotten this far from Hayes Appraisal District. The preliminary numbers are coming in, roughly speaking, 16 or 17%. Our projections were based upon 10%. There are protests going on at this point, and we won't get final values till I believe it's July 25th. But historically, our back and forth with the CAD, the appraisal district, has some change, but it's not going to be in a position that's going to put us below what our projections are. So at this point, we're confident on projection on interest rate, which is our borrowing rate. We're confident on our projections for growth going forward for the next 2 or 3 years. And if we meet those or exceed those, then the promise we made to the voters is going to be easily met.
And help remind people or explain to people, why do growth projections matter?
The way a voted bond is paid is through property taxes. Every resident has 2 factors in your tax rate for the city, not for the county, not for the school. This is just for the city. And that's maintenance and operation. And it's called interest and sinking, which is just for debt service. So maintenance and operation, part of the tax rate. And when you get your tax bill, it comes as just one tax rate. Internally, the city has to calculate it 2 ways. One, for maintenance and operation, which is running the city. Salaries, which is basically 85% of a city's operation budget. Electric bill, just to turn on the lights, what it takes to run the city every day. Police, city management, just everything. And that's on your general fund operations. The other part is debt service. Your debt service is a straight calculation. So all of the city's values is what we have to look at. And you have a debt service payment. After issuing bonds, you have a debt service payment, just like your mortgage. And you divide it by all the value in the city, and that's your INS portion of the tax rate. If we grow faster, that means the INS portion of the tax rate is going to be lower than what we projected. And so we want to under-promise. We want to over-deliver. So we're wanting to be below our growth rate, and we want to say the promises that the city council made when we went to the voters, we will not exceed 59-cent total tax rate. We want to always be below that. And historically, the last bond issue, we always remained below what our promise was, and we want to keep that because that's the promise the council makes to the citizens.
Thanks, Mark. And Brian, Mr. City Manager, there's other ways to look at saving money. I guess a question for you is, since interest rates matter, as Mark said, do we have to sell all of the bonds right up front, or can you spread that out? And maybe a question for you or Mark.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a lot of times it's misunderstood that if you have an authorization for $294 million, that we go sell all of those bonds at one time and hope it works out in the future. The reality is we sell them in series of bonds when the projects are ready to go. And in the back of the room and on our website, we have the schedule for when we expect the bonds to be needed. So we sell some of the bonds up front for some of the engineering, the design, the right-of-way acquisition. And then as the other projects are coming forward for construction, we sell other series of bonds to match up when those projects are ready to move forward. So the bottom line is, if a project is not moving forward as quickly as perhaps as we had wanted to, then we don't issue those bonds until later, and that gives the council a lot of opportunities to manage the overall debt service, the overall tax rate as they're looking at the program.
Thanks very much. And Mark, that can make a big difference, right?
Of the voted and approved bonds, $296 million is what was voted and approved. We sold earlier this year $45 million. That's the seed money to get through all those items that Brian just mentioned, engineering, rights of way, design, the whole process. The next series of bonds is going to be when we need it again. And so that's going to set us up perhaps for the next 12 to 18 months. And then we'll dovetail the next series of bonds in for what we can construct in the next 2 or 3 years. And so it gets layered, and that helps offset as we grow. We're not paying for it all today. We have more time for more people to move in, more value to increase. So again, the tax rate doesn't max up to what our cap is.
Great, thanks. For those of you at home, remember you can ask questions on the City of Kyle Facebook page or at kylebonds.com. We're beginning to get some questions in from the audience and from Facebook, so I want to move to those questions. We're going to be here for another half hour or so if your questions keep coming in, so feel free to submit some more. Let's take the first of those. Mayor, I'll start with you. Maybe somebody else wants to kick in. We have a question. What are the development plans along Center Street as things, as the reconstruction happens, as the construction happens?
Well, the primary purpose for the reconstruction of Center Street is to rehabilitate the existing roads that are already heaving and cracking. We've done major wastewater relocations. Back in the day, the wastewater lines along Center Street ran behind the homes. And so we did a major project over the last several years to bring those wastewater lines into the street, which is really where they belong. But that created, some heaving and some uneven issues. So to answer the question probably more directly, the city has been trying to work on bringing downtown revitalization to our downtown for a very long time. That is a slow and steady and methodical process. We have a downtown master plan that we've been working on now for about the last year. That plan is still in a draft form as the City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission and the public weigh in. We're trying to figure out exactly how to bring that development to the city. Over time, I think that plan will become more clear.
Since you've got the mic, let me follow up. We had this question about development. We just heard people talking about costs in roads, and one of the big costs is just acquiring right-of-way. So why can't the city go out and talk to some of the developers or landowners along some of these roads and get them to donate part of the land? Is that a possibility?
We do work with the development community when we're anticipating constructing a road to have that right-of-way dedicated. But what we don't want to do is plan for the road to be dedicated and therefore not fund it on the front end. We fund it, and then we work out those deals moving forward. So currently there are several projects that have a right-of-way dedicated as a funding source, but where we anticipate potentially working out a development deal to have that right-of-way dedicated. One of the roads that I failed to mention earlier, I went through all of them that I forgot about, was the Marketplace extension. So in 2013, we approved the first leg of Marketplace that ultimately became the Marketplace extension, Marketplace plus the extension to I-35 that you see today. Well, the other half of that road actually moves to the west side of HEB all the way up to where the new public safety center is going to be located. Well, that entire piece of road goes through one landowner's land. And we are working with that landowner to have that right-of-way conveyed because it's in the landowner's best interest, especially when it's one major landowner, to dedicate that right-of-way, and then we construct the road. That brings value to the land. It also saves us money.
And when you say conveyed, you mean, in essence, working in partnership with the cities to donate the land, right?
Yeah, you call it a trade. Yeah, call it a trade. And the real question is, what do we do with that savings? The 2013, I know there are a few folks in here who were around when we went to the only other road bond we've ever taken to the voters, which was passed. That road bond project was $37 million. and it had 5 or 6 different roads, but the right-of-way acquisition costs weren't included. A lot of the funding for utility relocation and easement acquisitions weren't included. And some of the features within the roads that you see, like wide sidewalks and lights, weren't fully planned for from an investment standpoint. And what happened was, over time, as we went to build those roads, we were over budget on every single one, because when it came time to build, we were like, yeah, we want the sidewalks. And yes, of course, we have to acquire this right of way. So it became a situation where we had to use cash reserves, which are property taxes that we're taking from the residents, to pay for roads that we had already asked the voters to pay for through a bond. We don't want to make that same mistake again. Now, I can't speak to the management and the councils of the day that made those decisions, but we took the opposite approach. We said, let's make sure we're considering all the potential cost factors in constructing this road and account for them when we go to the voters, so that we can deliver the projects within the resources that they authorize, hopefully having the opportunity to actually save money along the way. There are a few roads that got less lanes from that 2013 road bond package. And that's really unfortunate that it happened that way. The city council wanted to make sure that that didn't happen this time.
Well, in fact, it's one of the reasons that you all spent some money on engineering right up front, right, Joe, so that you could have a picture of what these might cost and how the design might work.
That's right, Jeff. Early on in the process, actually, to help the city staff and council prepare for the bond, we helped develop, with the assistance of the design engineers, what we call preliminary engineering reports. And the purpose of those reports is to get a really good understanding of the issues surrounding a project. And we wanted those reports done so we could get as much information as possible, so we could help produce cost estimates that were as accurate as possible.
Why don't you keep the mic a moment? We've got a question about acquiring land. You heard the mayor address maybe large landowners and what happens if they might benefit by a road, but also the city can benefit by them conveying their property. But the question here from the audience is, when you go to acquire this land, really more specifically, how do you move forward with acquisition, especially if it's private property? So can you walk people through that process?
Sure. The first thing to note for, like an individual property owner like Jeff mentioned, is that there is a very, very prescribed, regulated process. And it involves, and I don't pretend to be the expert in it, because it is so regulated and so prescribed. But the first thing we have to do is complete the preliminary designs. And at the end of the preliminary design, we will know maybe not every detail of the road, but we'll know where the right-of-way is going to be, where that footprint's going to be. And that allows us to do a few things. And one of those things is that we get, at that point, we're able to go out and engage the property owners in conversation about the right-of-way needed. And there is an appraisal process, there's a negotiation process that goes through that. But the thing to keep in mind is that the city or its agents, right, they don't show up to a property owner one day and say, hey, surprise, we need this land. It is a prescribed, again, a prescribed and regulated process. It is done through negotiation, with the hope that it could be resolved through a negotiation and an agreement. But the hope is that no one feels surprised or feels like they weren't able to have a discussion with the city about how their land was acquired for the project.
We have a question from Facebook. Brian, you're new as city manager, and so I don't even know that I'll put this to you. You can start with the mic and then feel free to hand it off. You may not be familiar with this tree, but there's a huge oak tree on Old Stagecoach Road that others are probably familiar with. And the question from Facebook is that there's a lot of concern about this oak tree. What can we do to preserve it, or what's being done to preserve that? And maybe, Joe and Mayor, just in general policy, to preserve other big trees, heritage oaks, that sort of thing, as the bond moves forward?
I do know this tree. It's a very large tree. It's right in the middle of the roadway, and I think we're going to do everything we can to save trees on these corridors. But I want to also be honest. I think this is right in the middle of where this road is going to be, and there's not a lot of options for that. But we are going to do whatever we can to save other trees in the community and to try to make conscious choices about that as we move forward. But that tree is pretty much right in the middle of the road. And Joe, you may have more specific comments. Whoever wants to take this hot potato question, we can go from.
Yeah, the stagecoach tree has been hotly discussed. I think it's 400 years old, so it's one of those things where it's like, hey, that tree's been around a lot longer than I have. What gives us the right to, have a conversation about potentially removing that tree? It's kind of interesting when you look at the history, but one thing to keep in mind is when the county put in that original road, they did a vertical saw cut through. So we did a study on actually that tree. We got an arborist to come and to take a look, and it was concluded that the tree is already towards the very end of its life and is not in a very healthy way. That being said, to Brian's point, especially out along that stagecoach area, there are a lot of great heritage oaks in a variety of places. But sometimes you have to make sacrifices. You have to make decisions about transportation, and in this case, it is most likely that tree will have to be removed. But those discussions are ongoing. There is a potential way to get around that tree. But it comes at a slowdown to the process, and also comes at a pretty considerable increased cost. And so, government has to make difficult decisions. Leaders have to make difficult decisions. What do? Do you spend more money and go around a tree that the arborists have said is mostly at the end of its life? Or do you go ahead and make that decision to build the road really in the way that it should be engineered? Trees don't belong in the middle of streets, so.
While we're talking about government policy, since a lot of these roads are coming because of congestion and safety issues with traffic, we've seen surveys over and over again saying that that's one of the top priorities for Kyle citizens. But the question that I've heard come up several times is then, why doesn't the city just stop growth? Why don't you just tell developers that they can't come?
Has anybody followed the Texas legislature lately? Every single legislative session, the state of Texas passes increasing laws and regulations designed specifically to eliminate or limit the city's ability to regulate development at all. The amount of tools that we have to make decisions for our own community are taken away from us slowly, basically every 2 years. Most recently, there are laws that prevent a city from involuntarily annexing a piece of land into the community, which is one of the ways that you regulate development. There have been laws that allow for landowners to disannex from your city, and if they are in the ETJ, they can remove themselves entirely from your community. The idea of water and wastewater as a means of controlling development is there, but there are also other ways for developers to get around that. So really the question is, do you want to have a say in the development? And if you want to have a say, you have to be willing to work with the proposals that are coming before you to find a path to yes. And if you don't do that, the development will continue to come regardless. It just won't come in a planned way that takes into consideration traffic flow and proper land use and highest and best use and economic diversity and quality of life, those things that we care about greatly.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got another question from the audience. I want to go back to Stagecoach. Is there going to be a bike path or a bike lane on Stagecoach?
Right. Yes. Old Stagecoach Road will have a segment of the Vibe on it, which is a shared use path.
And Brian, do you want to elaborate what a vibe? What's a vibe?
Yeah, that was it's really an interesting project. It's a play on the Kyle name, so it's Vibe, but with a Y, and so it's really a branding opportunity for the city and the trail system that we have. It's an interconnected series of trails across the community and lots of different modes of transportation. So walkers, runners, bicycles, and potentially golf carts as well could be used on these trails. And one of the things I really like about the program for the Vibe is nodes of development around the city that could have higher levels of activity around them, where you would have these trails, you would actually be going somewhere to go to an activity, to go out to eat, to go to some place that's of interest to you, that you'd have those opportunities around the community. So these are connections that we're trying to build into the road network, and also as we have other opportunities through development in our own capital improvement program to make those connections. So it's really an exciting opportunity.
And that Vibe is in some cases bigger than a normal sidewalk, right?
Yes, sir. It is. Very much so.
Another specific question from the audience: will the road bond extend Leiman around Seton Hospital?
Around it.
So, Joe, maybe you just talk about that whole network there and the access to Seton and what will be created through the bond.
That connects, right. The mayor explained this earlier. It does connect down to the hospital and just provides better access to that whole area. So the short answer is yes.
And maybe, Mayor, for you, I know that kind of emergency service access was one of the things that you all looked at as you thought about an overall transportation network. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't want to say all roads lead to the hospital, because that's not exactly, the fulfillment of a transportation vision. But it is something that, we want to make sure that our police department has the ability to get various places, which is why the marketplace extension and the police department's location is so important. They have the ability to deploy from that location once marketplace is finished, east and west all over the city, without fear of being blocked by the train. And multiple opportunities to get across I-35. The Seton Hospital has two major connections that are being added to it. One is the Kohlers underpass to Seton, and the other is the Kyle Parkway extension to Leiman, which is basically Seton extension to Leiman. Both of those both those roads will create great opportunity to get people to the hospital quickly if needed. Thank
you very much. And from the audience, we have a question about S-curves. Joe, so what's the anticipated date to start on the S-curves? Are the roads during that time going to be repaired, and why aren't the S-curves being properly maintained now? Does that, and maybe it's somebody in the audience, the S-curves specifically? Yes, sir.
Well, I live on Windy Hill Road, and the S-curves start Windy Hill Road from I-35. I've lived out there 30 years, and the roadway there in the S-curves has been a continual problem as far as smoothness. The mayor talked about his stagecoach road, but I can guarantee you, my wife just had a back operation, and it pains her to go through that S-curves even today.
Thank you.
I have at different times approached the roads and streets people via email, and mostly when they have chug holes or things that occur like that. But in those emails, I've requested that the roadway be properly maintained. And the things that they have right now are depressions.
Thank you. And I don't mean to cut you off, but it's hard for people watching to hear. So see if thank you. I want to see if I can do justice to the question. It's really for those who are watching on the live stream. The question is about Windy Hill Road and about the S-curves on Windy Hill, both current maintenance and what's going to happen. Joe?
So I can't speak to the current maintenance, but I can tell you that the two big objectives of the Windy Hill project are to make sure that there's additional capacity on the road, room for more cars as you get to and from I-35. But the other objective is to soften the curve, right? Is to not make it. I think what you're calling an S-curve, I would say, is maybe a sharp curve, based on your comments.
And
actually, it's not sharp per se. It's not a 90 degree or anything like that. They're soft curves, but the length of time, as you have indicated, it's going to be required to do any of the road work, especially if you're rebuilding a road, initially making a new road, that particular section. From what I've gathered, there is going to be a change in that, and you just sort of verified that.
Yes.
But
So my unfortunate job is to ask you to get one-on-one later, and let's talk in detail about that. But right now, I'm going to cut you off only because, again, people watching home can't hear. So, Joe, can you just jump in a little bit, explain the question some, and talk about what's going to happen there?
So the question was for Windy Hill Road, and the question was, do we have a project, or will the project do anything with the existing curves, right? And the answer is yes. That road, as part of the partial relocation of Windy Hill Road, those curves will be softened, and it will be brought up to a current standard, not only in terms of its geometry or how the road is designed, but also some of the other underlying features. So it'll be a new road that'll be brought up to a safer, more efficient standard, including addressing the curves. And we can, in a few minutes, talk to you more about the details of that around the board that we have for Windy Hill Road. We're happy to do it.
We've got another 5 or 10 minutes that we want to keep going, and then we'll break up. So those of you at home, if you want to see some of those boards that Joe just alluded to, come on down to City Hall. We'll be here till 8 o'clock, and I hope you'll stay and get your question answered in some detail. Back to a few other questions from Facebook. Mr. City Manager, there's a question about Center Street redevelopment, but it's really broader than that. The heart of the question is, will all downtown neighborhood streets be replaced and repaved as part of this bond package? And if not, can this be part of a future bond?
Yeah, so the answer is no. Not every street in the downtown area will be repaved as part of this process, but there's quite a bit of work taking place in downtown already. If you've been around City Hall, you can see some of the repaving that's been done. And as we are looking at the downtown area, we're trying to imagine some new plans. In fact, in our visioning workshop with the council this past weekend, we started talking about some ideas for downtown and how to reinvigorate downtown. And certainly as part of that process in the future, we can have other bond packages to address other streets. There will be other needs in the community beyond just the roads that are identified here in this bond package, but we'll be looking at those.
And in fact, there are some city staff here. If people want to talk about existing roads, they could grab some of your staff here tonight to talk about those issues, right?
Yes, sir. We'll be here, and I'll be here to talk to folks as well. And, I think to the gentleman's question earlier, there are a lot of roads that are in this bond package, but that means those roads will be done, but there's lots of other roads that need to be maintained and some of those that need to be repaired, and we'll be working on those in the city's regular budget, the operating budget, as we look at trying to provide the right level of funding to make sure those roads are taken care of. So we'll be looking at that.
When you talk about that kind of funding, Mark, you alluded to it earlier, but just want to circle back to clarify people. We've heard a lot about what's going on with inflation. Was there an inflation factor in some of these projections? Did the city think about inflation when you were planning these bonds?
From the get-go, that was one of the things that we were always worried about. When we started this, inflation was low. We don't know what it's going to end up as each year builds on others, but all of the design, all of the plans, the interest rates associated with it, all took into account inflation. So again, we're trying to make sure our end result is lower or cheaper or lower taxes than anything we projected. And we give ourselves some room, but if something happens out in the world that's out of our control, that's out of our control.
Joe, he just mentioned something could happen out in the world that's out of control. You can't control rain and the weather. You might find an ancient burial ground underneath the road as you move forward. These things happen, but it can be good or bad, right? Talk a little bit about design and what's going to be happening with change orders and really the strictness with you and your team and the city are managing costs.
So that's a great question. A few things. So when we did the cost estimates, we worked with the design engineers to develop cost estimates. One of the things we did was we built in a contingency, and a contingency is basically to cover things that come up or want to be added. Maybe there's another piece of sidewalk that needs to get done, or something like that. And then we also accounted for inflation. And one of the things the city managers asked us to do recently is to go back and look at those calculations to see if we're still, on point with them. And if we're not, we start thinking about how to mitigate them sooner rather than later. On the issue of change orders, one of the things we know, just based on history and where we've done this in other places, is that there is likely to be things that come up. Things will get added to projects, and things might get removed from projects, or something we thought was a big deal actually turns out to be something smaller. So we pay very close attention to the projects as they're going through design to see where we have opportunities to not only save money, but to save time. And we also keep very close watch on things that may cost us a little bit more money or a little bit more time. And that's why we've built in those contingency factors. The mayor mentioned, based on a question that Jeff asked about the donation of right-of-way, that is an opportunity to save money. And that money will either be saved, right, and not spent, or it may be used to add a feature that we didn't think, the city didn't think that they could maybe afford, or maybe that they needed. But again, the point is we keep very close watch on all those things, and we manage not only the individual projects, but we manage the program as a whole with the goal of getting everything done on time and delivering it at least at budget, and if we can, saving some money along the way.
Hold on to that mic a second, and before I ask the next question, I want to let you all in the audience know we're beginning to wind down. Those of you at home, if you have questions that are burning in your heart, now's the time to submit them, because we'll be closing off pretty soon. And the same here. If anybody needs a question, if you raise your hand, Andres Gonzalez with our team will come and bring you paper. So yeah, Andres, could you see there's a few folks here that may have questions? If you could get them some paper questions here from Kara's desk and deliver them so they can get those submitted. And while folks are doing that, either at home or here in the audience, Joe, you talked about, well, if you're able to save money on some projects, either through the way we acquire right-of-way or just smart design, that will be passed on, put back into the bond package, or go back to taxpayers, one of the two. But I really want to focus on this area of just design itself. You said, well, if we're able to improve that design, the design is already partway done. Will people still have an opportunity to talk about that design? We're at a public meeting today at Town Hall. Is this the last bite at the apple? Or will there be other opportunities for folks in the community to talk to you and your team about what roads are going to look like and how they might feel out in front of their particular house or neighborhood?
The answer is absolutely yes. So to use your biting the apple analogy, you could view this as like the first bite of the apple, right? The purpose of tonight is to remind everyone about what the projects are, give them some more context and background. As those projects get through the first stages of design, that'll be the time where our team, again, working with council and staff, will go out to the community. But instead of talking about the program in general, the community will get to weigh in on the details of the individual projects. So the answer is that this is just the beginning of the process, the interaction with the community, and there will be a few more bites at the apple before council says, yes, go construct.
Great. I know we've got a couple of questions coming. I'm going to throw it over to you, Brian, and the mayor in just a moment to close. But first, talk a little bit about that public engagement. I know, Mayor, that's been critical to the City Council from the beginning. You had some early opportunities for folks to talk about the bonds before you called them, and then during the fall election. You heard Joe say there'll be more opportunities. You want to just elaborate on the city's philosophy in that regard?
Well, I think it's very important that we deliver on our promises. To compare to the 2013 road bond, again, I think a lot of the community saw the roads that were being proposed and expected to see them immediately being worked on. But it took several years before those road projects actually came to fruition. When I was elected first in 2016, more than half the roads had not even started. So that has always been something that is burned in the back of my mind, because over time people forget about the commitment that was made by the city, and they wonder about where these road projects are. You know, we actually started the engineering and the design work before the election, so that we could get every project to at least a 10% design, so that we would know exactly where the roads were going to go or within a margin of error, and also exactly how much they were going to cost or within a margin of error. We didn't take the philosophy of, let's just write it on the back of a napkin, ask the voters for permission, and then if they say yes, then we'll kind of get started to figure out how we're going to make all of this happen. We wanted to be professional, and as a part of that is a public engagement process. This is the community holding us accountable to deliver on the roads that you authorize us to construct. That's what this is. This is for our staff and for our engineers. It's for the public, so that everybody knows what we're working on, and so that everybody can have confidence that we're not languishing in these projects. In fact, like I said, we designed to 10% before we took it to the voters. The voters passed the bonds in November, and by February, we had issued the full engineering contracts on all but 2 of the roads, and those 2 roads have now been put under contract for design and engineering as well. So our philosophy is we're not going to try to build these roads one at a time. We have a tranche of design, engineering, right-of-way acquisition, easement acquisition, and utility relocations. That early project, every road has a piece of that, and we are pushing on every single road simultaneously. And they're not all going to get ready to be constructed at the exact same time, but as the roads come to be ready to be constructed, we're going to move forward with that so that we can deliver in a timely manner. Because, as the gentleman said, my analogy of the Texas Giant being the sort of how it feels to drive Stagecoach, it's not the only road in Kyle where folks have made such an argument. So we're going to get these done as fast as we can.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I know that you've got a hard stop in a few minutes because you've got another event you need to attend. Thanks for being here. So I want to ask you, we'll go through these last questions quickly, but we have some great questions from the audience, follow-up questions. And Mark, the first one I'm going to direct to you. If we're going to issue the bonds potentially in segments, don't we run the risk of then issuing bonds at higher interest rates? How do we deal with that predictability?
There's not much you can. At the same chance of it being higher interest rates, it could be lower interest rates. So in our pro forma, in our estimates and in our projections, we used what we think are interest rates that we're not even going to touch. For example, our initial run was at 4 3/4. Our initial bond came in at 4 1/4. Our estimates going out to 2028, 2030 go out to 6%. We haven't seen a 6% bond. I'm not saying it won't happen, but we haven't seen a 6% bond in about 20 years. So we try to, again, estimate way high, but we don't know where rates are going to be. So project high and hope it comes in lower.
Brian, we heard that, 4 1/4%. Most people at home right now are hearing on the news that interest rates are really high. If they're out trying to get a car loan, it's 6, 7, 8, 9%. Why is the city able to borrow? Tell us about the city's credit rating. Why is the city able to borrow at that kind of interest?
Well, these are, we're AA rated bonds, so we have a very strong credit rating. And then the second piece of that is we issue tax-free bonds. So an investor buys our bonds, they don't pay any income taxes on the interest that they receive from those bonds. So because of that, there's a tax equivalent yield or a tax equivalent rate as if it was a private sector bond. It's much higher than that. So some of the rates that you see out in the marketplace are those taxable types, and that's why the rates that we're showing are much lower.
And we have another question for the audience, a follow-up question. Traffic circles, says the question asker, seem gratuitous. So are they really necessary?
Well, I'm not sure what a traffic circle is. When I think of traffic circle, I think of some of the interior intersections in Plum Creek, neighborhood connectors. We have a roundabouts first policy. A roundabout is a much more broad intersection designed to handle a lot of traffic. So the question is, are roundabouts better than signalized intersections? And so when you ask that question, the first thing you need to do is not react emotionally. These are things that have been studied greatly by the engineering community, and in the right location, with the right design, a roundabout accomplishes several things. One, it increases traffic flow compared to a signalized intersection by 50%. So does the community care about traffic flow and congestion? Number two, and perhaps more importantly, it reduces traffic fatalities by 90% compared to a signalized intersection. It reduces traffic collisions with injury by 50% and traffic collisions altogether by 30%. So what you're more likely to see with a roundabout is a fender bender, and what you are far less likely to see is a traffic collision that results in a fatality. And if you think about it, it's because when you approach a roundabout, you're having to slow down every single time. You're having to enter into a sort of a decel lane. You're only crossing one way. And so when you're crossing, there's just only one way to go through the intersection. Some of these roads that we have that are designed for 40, 45, 50 miles per hour, there's going to be 2 lanes with a turn lane, 4 ways around. And so cars are flying through. When red means stop, green means go, yellow means go very fast. That's a recipe for traffic fatalities and major violent collisions. I don't know how to say it any better than that, but the data very much supports roundabouts. Now, does a roundabout belong at every intersection? No. We already took several roundabouts that were proposed in this bond off the table because they didn't make sense at that intersection. But until somebody can demonstrate to us that a roundabout is a worse investment, really the data just says that they are better. And we should get on board if we care about, number one, traffic efficiency through an intersection, especially during peak times. And so that you're not stop, go, stop, go, stop, go, that there's a flow to it. And number two, if we care about safety. Both of those factors weigh heavily on my mind. But the city council will have opportunities to take a look at some of these roundabouts and where they're proposed. We'll make decisions on an intersection by intersection basis. And so just as there have been opportunities for the community to provide feedback on those roundabouts in the past, which have led to us taking a few out, there will be opportunities as well moving forward. But it is not gratuitous, in my opinion.
You talk about the national engineering data, and I've seen some of that data. There are just far fewer T-bones, as you alluded to. There's far fewer serious crashes. But that's data. Have you or any members of the council actually gone to cities that have roundabouts and see if they really work on the ground?
Yeah, so the most important thing that the factor to consider with the roundabouts, how it's designed. And so I've been a sort of a roundabouts champion since I was first elected. And where do you think of as the place that has the best roundabout policy or infrastructure? And that's Carmel, Indiana. They have over 180 roundabouts in their city, more roundabouts per capita than anywhere else. They're designed extremely well. And so we went up there. Several of the council, we actually took multiple trips to go tour Carmel, Indiana, and to drive around and experience what it's like to live in a city that is designed with the roundabouts first policy. Imagine this. They have freeways that are that have just as many vehicle trips per day as the city of Kyle does with I-35, and their intersections, when you exit, are roundabouts. There's no lights on either side of their freeway. Y'all don't freak out, okay? I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but that's what it is there. And you make an exit and you just go through a roundabout, and then you go across and you go through another roundabout, and it just flows like you can't imagine. You just never find yourself stuck in traffic in Carmel, Indiana. And so we have gone there and toured. One of our best roundabouts is the Burleson roundabout that we just created at Burleson and Marketplace. And I've gone out there at peak hours, and I've gotten my drone out and I've flown it. And it is just a thing of beauty to watch, especially like if the train backs up. The traffic, and then everybody stopped and it'll back up through the roundabout, and they're all just sort of sitting there. And then all of a sudden, the train lets up and they just flow out just perfectly. But if that's a signal and everybody backs up, then you got to rush up, then stop, rush up, then stop. But so roundabouts are really good. And I'm sorry, I'm preaching on roundabouts, which I can very much do.
Listen, we appreciate the enthusiasm. And to be mindful of time, I want to ask the city manager just to close, and then Mayor, we'll turn it over to you to finish up.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and appreciate everybody being here again. This is, as we talked about, the first of many discussions we're going to have in the community about the bond program. We'll be coming back to you several times as we're developing these, and we appreciate your attention to this, and we want to have lots of engagement and feedback. As the mayor said, there'll be a lot of discussions coming forward to the council, too, about individual intersections, so more to come, but we'll get back to you. So thanks for being here, and Jeff, thanks for moderating. We really appreciate it.
Mayor, last comments?
Thank you all for coming. As you can tell, this is a passion of mine. This is something that the city takes very seriously. We consider ourselves steward of public resources, and so there's for me, and I know for the many on the council, there's a pressure and a stress associated with trying to deliver a project as ambitious as this. But I just want you to rest assured that we are working on it every day. It's not a passive thought. It's not something that we're going to work on these roads when we get around to it. We've spent a lot of time and energy on the front end trying to set this up in such a way that these programs get delivered just as we say they are. And so thank you for being here. You're a part of that process.
Thank you all. Thank you all, panelists, for being here. Before we break up, I just want to remind those who are watching at home that we'll be here till 8 o'clock, and you're welcome to come down and meet with city staff face-to-face to get questions answered in more detail. With Joe and his team are here to talk about engineering if you have questions. Those of you in the audience, we hope you'll stay around. Not only our staff here, see we have a city council member in back, so we'd love to have you stay for a little while. Finally, this broadcast will be repeated. It'll be on kylebonds.com. That's with an S, kylebonds.com. So it'll take a little while for it to get up, but tell your friends and family if they've got questions that they can go and see this panel discussion, learn more about the roads. Not only is this video up there, but you can find some of the boards that are in the back. You can find more information, and that will be updated regularly. It's linked on the city site, and it's a standalone site as well, kylebonds.com. So feel free to keep up with the project as we go through that site. We thank you all for being here, and this concludes our live stream event.